Guys, this is our second run of our advanced course. We've done 2 Excel Essentials, and I know some of you have followed on from that particular course. It's kind of the lead up to this particular course. And some of you are brand new, haven't tuned in before. And this obviously being a free session, you might just having a look and see to see how this whole webinar thing works with regards to Excel training. And so typically what we're going to do today is run through session 1. That's what we will be doing. So we'll get the full session 1, but in addition to that, hopefully there'll be a little bit of time at the end and I can give you a sneak peek at some of the other sessions or the content we'll be covering in those other sessions. Unfortunately, our planning, obviously we didn't consult the Rugby 2019 World Cup calendar before we set this date. Those rugby fans amongst you, you will be well aware that the rugby kicks off in 45 minutes from now at 11:45. And so I'm sure our interest rating might take a dive. And if you hear my voice waning off, I'm obviously watching the live streaming on my other monitor. No, I'm just kidding. I won't have that running. But you could very well, if you consider yourself a multitasker, apparently it's proven we can't multitask, but if you do consider yourself a multitasker, you could watch the rugby on one monitor and watch the webinar on the other, if you so wish. And the other alternative, and is just to highlight as well, that all of these webinars are available to be viewed post the live session. On our website, you can access a recording of the webinar and you'd be able to watch and follow the whole thing as well. As Shane has mentioned, the workbooks that I'll be using to demo the content would have been emailed to you. It's also available to download from the GoToWebinar little panel. You can see the Excel Advanced Workbook Session 1. And if you click on that, you can open that at the same time. And the idea is that you can follow with that while I'm actually doing the training as well. And because we're not live training here, so we've got a video screen or a TV monitor, you're going to have a secondary monitor as a best option to view the content of the webinar on the one and have the spreadsheet open on the other and be able to tag along and complete as we go. So that's the idea behind this training, is that it's not just to sit and listen, it's to actually do, because that's the way we learn, is to actually complete the content and the skills as we go through them during the training session. Okay, so this very first section here, those of you who did the Excel Essentials course may even recognize this, because this is a section which we spend quite a bit of time on in the Essentials course, but it is so essential that I do need to cover it here again. And so it's probably a good refresher. We would have done this 2 months ago on the Essentials course, so it's worth refreshing. And those who've never seen this slide before, obviously it's important that we get to grips with this before we move on. And so at the top here, you can see we've got a whole lot of different data types that you can potentially enter into Excel. So starting from the left, we got a simple text, hello, alphanumeric, like an account number or a week number, combination of text and numbers. Then we have a dedicated number field, there's a whole number, and then a decimal. And there's a key difference when we enter that data as to how Excel interprets it. And you can see here that anything which is text or contains text is auto-aligned on the left, and anything that contains numerical values are auto-aligned on the right. And in the intermediate course, or the Essentials course, we did an experimentation of entering values which we think are numeric, but they are stored as text. So for example, if I had to type in a value of 10,5 instead of 10.5, notice how that aligns on the left. So even though that looks numeric to me, it's not. Only if I use my allocated decimal, which is a point, will that align to the right. So it's important that we are aware of these things when we enter data, that text auto-aligns on the left, numbers auto-align on the right, and if they don't, we need to address the issue, because we often will have errors in our spreadsheet if our numbers are stored as text. Now, we don't cover that in today's session. There is a section on importing and exporting CSV files, and this is where your data formats rear their ugly heads if they're not the same as the CSV file format. And so we will cover that in a bit more detail there. But before I do go on to number formatting being a facade, I quickly want to just highlight the importance of dates. And I'm going to start with a nice little shortcut of entering the current date, which is Control and the colon key. And if you do that, you'll get today's date. And pressing Tab will move me across. Control Shift and the colon key will give me the current time, sitting at 11:10. And if I want to do both, I can do Control and the colon key, put a space, Control Shift and the colon key. And so if we're working with our current date and time, that's quite a nice little shortcut. The advantage of using that as well is that it puts it in the correct format of what my machine is set to, and you can see it auto displays to the right. And the reason being is because dates and times are actually stored as numerical values. And I can prove that to you very quickly by highlighting those fields, going to my number formatting option here and changing that to a number. And so irrespective of what your date format is, if you were tuning in from the States and you had your format set to month, day, year instead of day, month, year, not sure why they do that, but anyway, that's the case. When you convert it to a number, you'll get exactly the same number, 43742, which is the number of days since the 1st of January 1900. And that's how dates are stored. Same with time. Time is a fraction of a day. So 0.47, we're close to midday. So you can see nearly halfway through the day, exactly 12 o'clock. This would be 0.50, so exactly a half. And you can see a combination of date and time is the number and the decimal component. So that's a point in time to the exact minute. And so because dates are numeric in nature, we can compute with them. So I'm just going to go back, either click on the back arrow or Control Z would be a way to undo that. So I can compute with dates because they're numeric, which is fantastic. Plus when I start sorting them, they sort chronologically, and there's a whole lot of date functions which you can now apply because dates are numeric in nature. And I think that's in session 3 or 4. We cover date and time formulas, which are great. Often people start counting dates on calendars, and Excel can compute them for me. And so these are some of the key things to be aware of, what your decimal is set to. Yours could very well be a comma instead of a point. And a fail-safe way of entering a decimal is if you use your numeric keypad. Most of us have a full-size keyboard on our laptops even, and if you use the decimal point there, it will put in whatever your decimal is set to. So if your decimal is set to a comma, it'll put a comma. If it's set to a point, it'll put in a point. And so that's a fail-safe way of entering a decimal. And you can see it'll display what your decimal is set to over here. Thousand separator could be a comma or a space. You can see in my case, it is a space. Those spaces don't actually exist because if I double click on there, you can see they disappear. It's simply a format so that it makes the number easier for me to read. But yours could be commas as opposed to spaces. List separator, now you won't see it in the actual value here, but if I double click on it and see a formula, those are the little separators between the arguments in the formula. So you can see mine is set to commas. Yours could very well be semicolons, especially if your decimal is a comma. These will be semicolons so that there's no ambiguity. Okay. And then finally, a date. The fail-safe way to enter a date, irrespective of what your date format is to always do year, month, and day because it's unambiguous. So if I do 2019-10 let's do the first of the month, 01. If I press enter on that, you can see that it switches it around and puts it in my date format, which is day, month, year. And so if you enter a date, always get into the habit of doing it as year, month, day, so that it doesn't confuse one, because if American had entered 01/10/2019, he would be sitting on the 10th of January instead of the 1st of October. And so those are the key things to be aware of. We will go to the regional settings in session 2 next week to make some alterations there when we work with CSVs, and that's where you can go and change them. We don't have time in this session to do so, but those are just the key things to look out for: your decimal point, your thousand separator, your list separator, and your date format. Okay, and on the right hand side here, is a little illustration of how number formattings can be a facade. Now, number formats are great because they put numbers into context. So when I'm dealing with 10 Rand 50 as a value, I want to display the Rand symbol and the 50 with the 0 on the end instead of just 10.5 because it puts into context for me. But what can be confusing though is that often people think that that's what's entered in the cell. But if I select that cell there, you'll see here the actual value is 10.5, not 10 Rand 50. And so number formatting can be a facade, meaning what you see is not what you get. Now, believe it or not, every single one of these values here is actually 10.5. And look at all the different ways they display. You would never say that these are both the same value. But because numbers are stored numerically, starting from the 1st of January 1900, I get the 10th of January 1900. And 0.5 is the time component, is 12 o'clock, as I mentioned earlier. And to quickly prove my point, if I highlight all of those and convert them back to general, they are exactly 10.5. Just all formatted using those formats. So just be very aware that often what you see is not the underlying value. Okay. Then on the left-hand side here, just a little indication of auto-formatting. Excel sometimes makes assumptions, and if we're aware of those, they can be useful, but if we're not, they can get us into trouble. So if you enter what you think is a partial date, so if I was entering a birthday, for example, and the birthday was coming up shortly, let's say it was the 20th of October, so I type in here 20th of October. Now we think we're entering a yearless date. Meanwhile, Excel has made some assumptions. You can see it's aligned to the right, so it has to be a complete numerical date. And if I select that and look at my formula bar at the top, it's assumed the current year. And so we can never enter a yearless date or a partial date because Excel assumes the component that you haven't entered. So if we're dealing with the current year, that's great because I don't have to enter the year, it makes that assumption. But if I'm not aware of that, I can end up getting into trouble. It's the same if I enter a dayless date. So if I was just entering October, so if I did the 10th, 2019, now the clue there should be that it's auto-formatted that. And if I reselect it, you'll see here it defaults it to the 1st of the month. So a yearless date defaults to the current year. A dayless date defaults to the 1st. Again, can be useful, but can catch us out if we don't know that. Also, if you type in a percentage, so for example, if I typed in here 15%, the actual underlying value here is not 15, it's actually 0.15. And a nice way to check that is if you select the cell, click on the drop down next to your formatting, and all the different ways that particular number, which has got the focus, can be displayed, is displayed here in the little preview. So you can see the underlying value there is 0.15, not 15. And so be aware that when you enter data, it'll take on a recognized format. Same with time. 12, if I typed in there 12 o'clock, we should all know that that value is not 12. That value is 0.5 because it's halfway through our day and it's automatically recognized the format and align it to the right. Can also be a bit irritating because let's say I was doing a solution which were dealing with the roads in SA and I was riding along the R56, so I type in here R56 and Excel immediately wants to take that as a Rand value, so it converts it to currency. So you can see even though I didn't intend to type in a currency, because R is my Rand or my currency symbol, it automatically defaults that. And if you weren't part of the Essentials course, just a quick reminder, or if you were, a quick reminder, if you weren't, just to illustrate that if I wanted to type in and keep it as text, I put an apostrophe first and it automatically aligns it to the left. Okay, so that's auto formatting. Can be useful, but also frustrating if you don't know what Excel is actually doing and how to circumnavigate that if I don't want it to auto format. And all of those notes are detailed here in the bottom. And that's how our workbooks are put together. You'll see there's place for you to experiment, just like I've done here. And then further down or scattered across the sheet are these little blue boxes with some key points. And so you don't have to jot down notes, even if you like to, you're more than welcome to, but everything is contained in the workbook that you've downloaded, and there's some notes just detailing all the things that we've covered in this little summary of key essentials. Okay, we're going to move on from this to this next tab called Spreadsheet Integrity. So if you can follow with me and just move across to the next sheet. And this is an exercise that we often do in the Excel intermediate course. We build it from scratch. And here you can see it's a personal budget. Hopefully you recognize that. You may have one of your own that looks a little similar. And just to put into context, you can see here I've got all my different categories, my 2 incomes and my expenses down the left-hand side, and my months of the year across the top. I've got some aggregated totals on the right-hand side here and at the bottom. And I've got a couple of pretty graphs which trying to graphically represent that data, plus some conditional formatting. You can see here highlighting and representing certain cells. And what we're going to do is we're going to use this to recap a lot of the key essentials components, as well as introduce to you some more components which are very useful to maintain spreadsheet integrity. As the tab suggests, that's what we're looking at here. And there's some key things we need to be very aware of. A lot of guys have some incredibly elaborate looking spreadsheets, but they're riddled with errors unbeknown to them, and they become meaningless, because if your data is not correct and the calculations are wrong, then that makes that spreadsheet null and void, and actually worse than having nothing, because it's giving us false information, not just no information. And so we're going to work through this list here on the right-hand side, golden rules for spreadsheet integrity. And we're going to just systematically work through them, and we're going to use this spreadsheet here, this personal budget, to highlight those. So the first thing we need to be aware of is that numbers, dates, and times should always align to the right. And so just glancing at your spreadsheet, that should be evident. And even if you wanted to do a double check, you could just widen the columns quickly just to see if everything that is numeric is aligned on the right, and indeed they are. And so that is what you can just do at face value at a glance. There's a little exercise we do a little bit later just to highlight the importance of even partial dates aligning to the right. You can see these are currently stored as text, but we'll do a little experiment later to actually store those as genuine dates. But for now, they're stored as text, and that's completely fine. Okay. Now, when you view a spreadsheet like this for the very first time, or you inherit a massive spreadsheet, somebody's left the company and they've said, okay, you need to take over, often trying to figure out how this whole thing's put together is quite daunting. And so most of you are probably aware that when you click on a cell, you can establish the difference of to whether it's a hard-coded value, meaning it's been entered because the value displays in the formula bar, or a formula, because if you click on the cell, it says a formula behind it, it displays the formula. So randomly clicking on a few cells will start to give you a bit of an idea that the majority of the cells in this particular workbook are formula-driven. Meaning they're linked to other cells and dependent on other cells. But that's going to be time consuming if I wanted to do that comprehensively across all of the cells in this particular spreadsheet. So there's some very useful tools that we can use under the formulas tab. So I'm going to go to the formulas tab at the top here. And on the right hand side under formula auditing, there's some very cool features here which enable me to get an overview of how the spreadsheet is put together. So here if I click on show formulas, you can see now that all the formulas are displayed in the cell, not the values that the formulas create. And if I click on any of those cells, it automatically shows me graphically which cells are used in those formulas. So I can get a much better understanding now on how the spreadsheet is put together. And so you can see here that January is basically a starting point to build this budget, and then all subsequent months are linked to that, either directly by just saying and making it equal to the previous month. Sometimes it changes. So here you can see I've bumped up income 2, which is a rental, by 10%. Obviously, the lease was due for renewal, and so I bumped it up by 10%, and I used a formula to do that. You can see here as well, there are a couple of expense categories which we've inflation linked by increasing them by 1% each month, so that it slowly increases to be a bit more realistic, because these kind of categories do that kind of thing. They increase, they're not static for the entire year. So groceries, household, pets, and entertainment. Even miscellaneous, you can see here, is a combination of my two incomes. That's that category which we spend money on, which we have no account for. So let's budget for it. And the more we earn, the more we spend. So that's why we've linked it to these two incomes. So just 10% of my combined income. And so every cell that I click on that has a formula will graphically now display how that formula is created. So very quickly, I can get an understanding of how the spreadsheet is put together. It does mess a bit with your column widths, because to display those formulas, those column widths need to be wider, but it's not a problem, because as soon as I deselect the show formulas, it will go back to normal. Just a reminder as well that every single item in your formula bar at the top, sorry, in your ribbons at the top, if they have an equivalent shortcut, it will show it to you in brackets. So you can see here the shortcut for showing formulas is Control and the apostrophe, but it's the one that's at a slight angle, not the one next to the Enter key. It's the one that shares the tilde key, that little squiggle, between your Escape and your Tab key on the top left-hand side. And so I use this quite frequently, actually, to toggle between the formula mode and your normal mode. So holding the Control key and pressing the tilde key, you can see it shows the formulas and comes back again. And so it's a very nice way just to quickly toggle between the formula mode and the normal view without having to go to the formulas ribbon. Okay. Then if you're wanting to focus on a particular cell and see how it's made up, or potentially where it's used in further formulas, you can go and select that cell and use these two guys here, trace precedence and dependence. And so if you wanted to backtrack to see which values were used to calculate a particular cell, normally what we do is we double click on it and the formula graphically shows you. But to drill further back, I would then have to go and drill back on each of these individually to see how those are working. If I use this trace precedence though, I can continue back from my very first starting point. So let's investigate this total expenses value and see where ultimately the values come from. So I click on trace precedence. Again, that's pretty similar to, and no different to just double clicking on it. But if I do it a second time, you can see here that those in turn are being calculated by using all the values across the months. Click on it again, and my miscellaneous column, remember, or row, is being calculated using my two incomes, and you can see it traces back to those two there. Click on it again, and there you can see my totals in December are calculated by successive months, so just going back, making it equal to the previous month. And so those all trace back ultimately to January's values. I'll click on it again. I don't know if you can hear a sound that my computer makes, but if not, there's a little tring sound, which means I've gone to the end of the line, and obviously I don't go any further. This can be useful because sometimes we have these massive, elaborate workbooks which are all connected to each other, and it'll actually show you that it comes from another workbook. If you click on it a second time, it opens a little box and says this is not traced back to this particular workbook. And so it gives you a nice way of showing how these values are calculated. Once you're done, click on remove arrows, and I'm back to where I started. What's also very useful is if you wanted to find out where value is being used in further formulas. So where is this value in cell N20 being used in calculations? I can click on trace dependence. And there you can see those cells here are dependent on that one. It's used to calculate my expense percentage. And if I click on that, you can see that it's just taking the value and dividing by the total and converting it to percent. And then likewise, obviously, subtracting expense from income to get my net value. And so those are very useful little tools to get to grips of how the spreadsheet is put together. Okay. The another thing to be aware of is your little green triangles in the top left-hand corner. And that's showing a potential error. And it's good to investigate those and clear them if there is no error present. So if I click on this one here, you'll see by hovering over my little yellow triangle on the left, that this formula differs from the formulas in the other areas of the spreadsheet. And if you can recall, that's where we bumped up the income 2, which is a little rental of a flat that I've got going, by 10%. And so that's why it's different. And there's nothing wrong with that. And so what I should do is click on this and choose to ignore the error so that it doesn't display. And so wherever you see these little green triangles, you should do that. And you can get rid of them all at the same time by highlighting multiple cells which have them. As long as the very first cell contains one of those green triangles, your little warning sign still appears, and you can select that and choose to ignore the error, and they disappear. So it's good to keep a clean sheet, as it were, so that if they pop up, then you can potentially spot an error. There is also a way to methodically work through your entire workbook instead of just trying to spot green triangles. This is a small spreadsheet. You can imagine if you've got a massive spreadsheet, you may very well miss one. And then what you can do is you can use this error checking option. And the way that works is similar to spell checker. Wherever your mouse pointer, your cell is selected, so wherever you click your mouse pointer, it'll start at that point and then start trolling through your spreadsheet across and then down through the rows until it finds a potential error. So let's just try that. Click on error checking. And you can see it's actually found one which was a little obscured because I had conditional formatting. There is a little green triangle there, but I missed it because of the conditional formatting. And you can see if you go through this method, you have various different options. You can copy the formula from above if you know that it should be equal to that. You can ask for help. You can simply ignore the error, or you can edit it. I'd rather, and most of the times I click on edit because I want to see what the issue is. I don't want to just simply assume I need to copy the formula from the cell above. So if I click on edit in the formula bar, you can see here, let's just close this down, that this is stopped short of December. So it's not including the December value. So this should actually extend through to December. So I've made the change and you can see my green triangle falls away. And so it is good to watch out for and clear green triangles if there's nothing wrong with them, so that if they do pop up when you work with a spreadsheet, you know that those are the ones that you need to address. Or you could do a once-off and go through the error checking and actually troll through a whole worksheet. Probably a good thing to do because as I said earlier, there's no point in having a fancy spreadsheet if it's filled with errors. Okay. So that's completed point number 2. Point number 3, empty cells are not the same as 0 for aggregated calculations. And what I'm going to do to illustrate this, I'm going to insert a new column here between M and N, so between December and the totals, by right-clicking on N and clicking on Insert. And I'm going to put a heading here called Average. And I'm going to put in a formula. Quickest way to do average is to use the drop-down from AutoSum, and because I'm in the Formulas tab, I can access it here. You can do it from the Home ribbon as well. I'm just going to go here, select Average, and I'm wanting to work at the average of all my months. So let's do that, and I'm going to reselect that cell, double-click the bottom right-hand corner, so it replicates all the way down. So that's calculating the average monthly spend for this particular calendar year. This way this budget has been set up. What I wanted to highlight here is the car expenses. Now at the moment, you can see that there are 0 values put in here. Now the only reason why they're dashes is because the formatting is accounting, and accounting puts a dash instead of a 0. But if I select the cell, you can see there it's a 0 value. And that's basically then incorporated and included in the average. And that's what you would expect. Okay, so if I highlight all of those cells there like that, remember at the bottom here it gives me a summary of those highlighted cells. So the total is 24,000. That's basically 3,000 times 8 months. The count is 12 months, and the average is the sum divided by the count. So I get 2,000, which is correct because the average spend for the year on my car, even though I stopped paying in September, the average is 2,000 for the entire year. If I made those zeros, so if I deleted those, notice the average increases to 3,000. So it's averaging only those months, and where there's no values, it doesn't include that. And if I re-highlight those, you'll see here that the count has dropped down to 8. So that's key. 24 divided by 8 is 3, whereas before it was divided by 12 to give me 2. And a lot of people have incorrect data in their spreadsheet because they assume that a blank cell will give them the same results as a cell which has a 0 in it. And that's definitely not the case. It's the same with you adding values. Notice that value 24 never changes because that's summing them. But as soon as I start doing counts and averages and those type of aggregations, it will give me a wrong result if I don't have the correct representation in there. So if you need a 0, put a 0 in. A blank cell does not work the same as a 0 cell. Very important. Okay. Then fourth point, Excel's golden rule. And that says if a formula input can change, put it into a cell and refer to it in the formula with a cell reference. And so if there are certain calculations in a formula which are static, which will not change, then we can hard code them. So for example here, when I increase the guy's rate by 10%, I only want to make a 10% increase by year, and so there's no point in pulling this out and making a cell reference. I can hard code that, no problem. But what about these guys here? Remember in the groceries, household, pets, and entertainment, I'm actually going to switch to my formula mode just to quickly show you that again. Remember we increased these by 1% each month. So that was like an approximation. But let's say I wanted this to be like a financial model, and as and when the interest rate increases, not interest rate, but my rate of inflation increases, I want to automatically update this so that it takes that into account. I don't want to go and have to edit every single one of these formulas that have the 101% in them. I want it to dynamically update with a single change. And that's what Excel's golden rule speaks to. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert 2 new rows above my current data set here. And I'm going to highlight those 2 like that. To add rows and columns, once you've highlighted, either right click and insert, or Control and plus is a way to insert. And because I highlighted 2, it added 2. That's quite neat. And I'm going to put in here a heading called monthly inflation. And I'm going to currently set that to 1%. And I'm going to type in there 1%. Notice what happens though. When I type it as 1%, it changes because 1% is 0.01. But because I'm in formula mode, it displays it, and it displays on the left-hand side. So notice that even numerical values display on the left-hand side. If I toggle back quickly using my tilde key, Control, notice it does display as 1%, but in my formula mode, it displays as 0.01. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to modify this formula here so that it references that cell instead of hard coding at 101%. So I double click in here and I make an alteration. So I'm going to multiply it first by 1, so that's the actual value of 4,000, and then I'm going to add whatever this percentage is, which is currently 1. So I add that cell reference now of B1, and that then should give me the same value, because that'll give me 1.01, which is 101%, and increase the previous January's value by 1%. Now what I want to do though is replicate this across so that it always, I can replicate it so that it references the cell B1 for each and every one of these. Now, we covered this in the Essentials course, and it is a key component to working with formulas in Excel, and that is to make that cell absolute, which means that when I replicate it, it's not going to change, because by default, if I had to select that and replicate it across, notice how that changes to C1. So this formula now is referencing that cell, because it becomes relevant to its new location. And I don't want that. I want to lock this completely. And so I double click in this cell here and I use my function key F4. If you're pressing F4 and nothing's happening, then you need to press the FN key on your keyboard at the same time. It's just a keyboard configuration. It just varies from one laptop to the next. And so just need to establish if you need the FN key or not. Once you have, you've got now that cell absolutely locked. And if I reselect that cell now and replicate it across all the way through to December, notice that it's still referencing cell B1. Even if I replicate it down, it's referencing cell B1 because it's absolutely locked. Okay. I now need to take that formula and do the same for pets and entertainment. I can't replicate it across phone because that is a very different calculation. So I'm going to copy and paste. So I'm going to select that, Control C, and go down here, Control V to paste it. And now it's referencing that same cell. This one is relative. You can see B12 changed to B15, which is exactly what I want because I'm working with pets now, not groceries. But the reference to B1 is locked. And so now, press Escape to get rid of my marching ants. I can do the same, replicate that all the way across to December and down. Cool. So if I now toggle back to my calculated view, I've got exactly the same results at this point. But if monthly inflation had to change, and 1%, the rate that food goes up, there's no way it's increasing by 1% a month. It's more like 10. No, maybe not, but it's at least 2. So I changed that to 2. Notice that these values dynamically change now. And that's what Excel golden rule states. Don't change them in each of these individual formulas. Reference the cell and you can pull it out. It also makes your spreadsheet more transparent because you can see the monthly inflation value reflected at face value in the spreadsheet. You don't have to go digging into formulas to go and find it. It's right there. I'm going to round this off by adding one more row at the top here because we don't typically talk about monthly inflation. We have an annual inflation figure. And so I'm going to put in here annual inflation. They tell me it's 7 or 8%, but for things like groceries, household, pets, and entertainment, it's definitely way more than that. I'm going to make it 15%. And I'm going to make my monthly inflation to be 1/12 of that. So it's going to be equal to cell above divided by 12. Remember, formatting being a facade. So that's, you say 15 divided by 12 is not 1. It's just a formatting issue that's rounded to the nearest whole percentage at this point. So if I had to increase the percentage decimal, the one on the left, this always confuses me because I think it's the wrong way around personally. Anyway, let's just do that. Knock it twice, 1.25. So that's the actual monthly inflation, 1.25%. And you can see that these inflation-linked sections have been automatically adjusted, which is great. I make one change and all of these change. And that's what Excel's golden rule states. Excel's second golden rule is somewhat similar. It's basically saying rather use formulas than hard-coded values, but it says never have the same input value listed more than once. Reference the original. And we've already got that in play here by making each successive month equal to the previous month. So for example, if my figures change in January, they will be accommodated across the board for all the different months. So for example, I got a pleasant surprise when I arrived at work in January and I had a 10% increase and I changed it to 33. Notice how all of these changed as well because they are linked. Even my December one has got a 60% increase on it because that's taking into account my bonus. Unfortunately, I can't double it because the tax man swipes most of it, well, 40% of it. So that is now dynamically updating based on January's figures. And so it speaks to my second golden rule of making a single change and it cascades throughout my spreadsheet. It's also very important when we get to a feature called Goal Seek, which we'll finish off. You can see here it's the last tab here before the task. We'll finish off with that today. And if you don't have your spreadsheet calculated using formulas, you can't use features like Goal Seek, which are pretty cool features, and I'll show you when we get to that. Okay, we are marching on through our different sections here on the right-hand side. We've done the first 5 points. those of you who are rugby fans will be switching across to the one screen that you've got, or the TV in your office, and keeping an eye on that. And for the rest of us, we'll be able to pick up from half time. Okay, so good luck to the Boca. May they do well against Italy. For now, though, let's keep our focus on our budget for next year. Okay, so point number 6, add formulas such as running totals to cross-check your spreadsheet. Now, these are very cool, running totals, because they do two things for us. They give us a point-in-time value, which our spreadsheet won't necessarily give us, plus they build integrity into our spreadsheet. So I'm going to put in here a heading called running total underneath my net value. And I'm going to build one here so that at a point in time, I can see what my net value is. You can see I take a bit of a hit in May. I've got a medical expense, got an operation plan, and I don't have gap cover. So note to self, get gap cover, because medical aids don't cover it. But for now, I have to budget for it. And you can see I'm taking a hit there. And I want to see, do I have enough accumulated wealth to be able to handle that? Because I can't obviously run into negatives. So here, I'm going to build a running total to give me that. So it's going to be equal to, at the moment, just January's value. So we're making the assumption here we don't have a carryover from the previous year. So the first running total value is the same as January. And then here, it's going to be equal to that January value plus the contribution from February, net total. And so by the end of February, I've got 29. I can then take that formula and literally run it all the way through to December. And so that's my total net value at the end of December. And that should also equate to this total here, which is summing all of those values at once. So if I highlight those, you can see here, I do get 23,897. But this is not right. It's working out, it's obviously not totaling it correctly because it's working it out with the total. So there's something wrong with this calculation. And that's where running totals are great, because I could have merely carried on with the spreadsheet and not realizing that I'm quite way out here, more than double, which would be nice, but obviously there's something wrong there. And so you get to start drilling down now to see where the error is. And so for example, if I double click on this cell, that's calculating all of those, and now we checked those before, so those should be fine. If I double click on this, it's using those totals. Okay, so let's check these totals here. That one seems fine. This one, aha, you can see it's including the average. Now, I did this for a purpose. Remember I squeezed in this average column earlier. And normally when we add data outside of a range, so this previously was only summing from January through to December, I insert a new column, and Excel thinks it's clever now because it thinks, okay, you're adding it to the end, maybe you want to include it. Include it when I do it and I manually type in the formula, but when I replicate it, it doesn't. So it didn't do it for these ones, which I think is a bit of a bug, to be honest, because it shouldn't do that. And so I'm going to have to fix this now by squeezing out the average. Unfortunately, I cannot include that. It doesn't make sense into my total. So I do that. It lowers the total income one. That is now 23,000, and you can see those are a genuine match, which is great. And so you can see how running totals helped me figure out that issue. It wasn't actually highlighted as an error. It didn't have a green triangle in it, which is interesting. And so sometimes Excel won't pick up these inconsistencies. And so running totals are another way to be able to do that. Okay, next point. Use a formula to keep audit trails of changes where possible. So over here, if I go to my insurance, because I need to increase that, let's say I inherited my grandmother's car, because, or my mother's car, I should say, because she's unable to drive anymore, or granny's car, could be anybody's, but I still need to pay insurance on that. So I had to increase the insurance. So let's say my insurance now has been bumped up by 900 Rand. I could just add it and make it 19, but rather do this. Make a little formula of it. Put an equal sign in front, plus 900, like that. It helps prevent basic mathematical errors. Sometimes we think we can add and we get it wrong. Plus, it also gives me an audit trail because I think, why is my insurance 19? Surely it was 1. I click on that, and that's enough of a trigger to remind me, oh yes, I had to add 900 Rand. And so add formulas into your spreadsheet, even though they're not referencing cells, they're kind of hard-coded formulas, but they do help keep an audit trail of your data. Okay. Then the importance of empty rows and columns defining a range. The more we work with Excel, the more you'll realize the emphasis placed on that. And even though I'm dealing with one spreadsheet here, you will, well, this spreadsheet is broken up into multiple different data ranges. And I can prove that because if I select a cell within my spreadsheet and I use my shortcut to select a range, Control A, very useful if you didn't know that, you can see that is treated as an independent range. This little guy up here is also part of a little 4-cell range at the top. This here is a separate range, and so is this a separate range. And when we start to filter and sort data, it also does it within the ranges only. And so the advantage of that is that I can work with data independently of others. The disadvantage is that I can end up sorting data on one side of a spreadsheet and not the other if I've got some blank rows and columns in between. And we highlighted that in the Essentials course. But I'm going to use this to my advantage now because I'm wanting to rank my expenses in order and not pull my incomes into that ranking. And so to do that, I'm going to insert a new row between income 2 and home loan by highlighting that. Remember, Control and plus to give me an added row in there, or the formulas still work, which is great. But now I can reorder this. So I can select a cell, just to prove it, sorry, this is an independent range, Control A. You can see now it's split off from my incomes. If I select one of these cells here now and go to my data tab and reorder this in ascending order or descending order by clicking on the A to Z button. If I click on that, you can see now it reorders this data only in order from lowest to highest. But I've obviously got an issue here because I have a hash value error on my miscellaneous column. So if I see that, I hit my Excel panic button, which is the keyboard equivalent to the undo, Control Z. So let's do that to get out of trouble. And the reason being is my miscellaneous column is referencing these two cells. And so when I order it and I rank it, A to Z, it moves up 2 values because it's not the biggest expense, it's third from the bottom. But the formula now references the 2 cells above because remember, formulas become relevant to their new location. And so in order for me to be able to reorder data where formulas go across rows, I need to apply some sort of locking, absolute cell references, so that the cell references to income 1 and 2 remain the same. And so to fix this, what I need to do first here, into my miscellaneous column here, I need to lock the reference to the row, but only the row, because when I replicate this, I want the column reference to be relative. And so this is an introduction to mixed cell references. So I'm only going to put a $ in front of the row, not the column. And I can do that one of 2 ways. I can manually do it, or if I press the function key F4, notice if I do it again, it cycles through the different types of absolute cell references I can apply. So that's nothing, that's both. That's just the row, which is what I want there, and then likewise for B6. So it's locking the column, sorry, locking the row, not the column. And if I reselect that, replicate it across, nothing should change, which is great. It's still referencing income 1 and 2 from the correct month. However, if I had to order this now, click on that cell, click on A to Z, the formula doesn't break because I locked the row reference. Remember, I locked rows 5 and 6, and so they don't jump up to rows 3 and 4 when miscellaneous moves. And so I can reorder this without my miscellaneous column breaking. And I'll show you in the next exercise cell references, mixed cell references, and a cool way to be able to complete a formula array by using that. But for now, that sorts and rectifies my issue here. Okay, finally, last point, rounding. And I'm also going to do a little recap of some of our advanced copy and paste methods for this as well. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to extract the months and the single expense of groceries. And to do that, I'm going to hold down the control key while I select the groceries row at the same time. Okay, so where real mouse is useful, if you've got a keypad only, it gets a bit tricky, you do a bit of finger gymnastics to get that right. So once those are highlighted, I'm going to copy Control C, and I'm going to go across to the right-hand side here now, into some empty space. And I'm going to right-click here, and I'm going to go to Paste Special, because what I'm wanting to do is transpose this data so it goes down columns, not across rows. I'll click on Transpose. I'm wanting to pull through just the values, not the formulas, but I also want the number formats. So I want the currency symbol to come through as well. So I've got a combination copy paste special going here, formulas, number formats, and transpose. Click on OK, and there we have it. So you can see here that this is now transposed. These are actual values. Did I click on formulas? I clicked on the wrong thing. I did formulas and number formats. I want values. Sorry, let me go back again. Control Z. Let's undo that. The marching ants are still running, so it's still in the copy paste special. So I go paste special. I want values and number formats. My bad. Click on OK and transpose. Okay, so these are actual values now. You can see there the formulas. Might be a good little illustration of that anyway. There's no formulas in here anymore. So it's not linking to that. It's now automatically, sorry, it's extracted the actual values behind it. And you can see there's a whole lot of decimals behind those, even though it's just displaying to the nearest whole number. Okay. Now, one thing I wanted to highlight here is the months. Now, across the top here, there was no problem with them stored as text. But what happens if I wanted to change the order of this? Let's say I wanted to reverse this order. So if I clicked on that and I clicked on Z to A, it reorders that. But if I want to try and order it back by months, click on A to Z, it sorts it alphabetically now, not in chronological order, which is a problem. I have to manually go and get that back again. So if I undo that, Control Z, a better solution would be to store this as a genuine date. And I can do that by saying that this is the 1st of January, and this budget is for, let's say it's for next year, so 2020, like that. Just widen that column. Select that cell, replicate it down. Now, if you remember from the Essentials course, I can overwrite the default increment of 1 day at a time to a month at a time and fill months. There conveniently fills the months. Then all I need to do is change the format. Okay, now remember, if I can't find the format that I'm looking for here, I need to go to More Number Formats. The shortcut for that is Control and 1 to bring up my formatting window. And here under the custom format, I can do whatever format I want. And so here, if I want to just display months, MMM, because all I want is the name of the month abbreviated to 3 characters. And there we have it, exactly the same, except it's a line on the right. That's the telltale sign that that is now stored as a genuine date. And if I click on that to look at the formula bar, you can see a genuine date there. The advantage of this now is that if I had to reorder this, let's quickly reorder those, Z to A. If I want to get them back in chronological order, I click on here and I go to A to Z. And it ranks it because that is now ranking the date, not the text JANFEB, which obviously will rank alphabetically as opposed to numerically. And so those are some of the key reasons for storing genuine dates when we can start ordering data. Okay, so that was just by the by. On the right-hand side here, though, I'm going to do the following. I'm going to highlight the importance of rounding. Before I do that, I'm going to increase the number of decimals here to 2. Sorry, let's just highlight those. Increase the number of decimals here to 2. Here we go. Okay, and I'm going to put a auto sum at the bottom of this. So let's do shortcut for that, Alt and equals. Be useful to do an auto sum. And I get a total 51,441.45. But if I do this in pastel, I get a different answer. I get 51,441.44. And I'm going to illustrate what pastel is doing. And the reason is that pastel always rounds to 2 decimal places when you're dealing with currency. And so what it's doing actually is the following. I'm going to use a round function to round this specifically to 2 decimal places. So I'm going to say it's equal to that value, equal to round. Press tab to select the function, select the value, and I'm going to round this to 2 decimal places, like that. Double click the bottom right hand corner, press Alt and equals to get my auto sum, and I set to widen the column of fraction. And you can see there I get 44, even though those are identical to the naked eye. I'm 1 cent out in the total, and this frustrates many people. I've had to rescue many a finance department for having to fudge a cent here and there to get it to match pastel accounting. And the reason being is that pastel is doing the rounding. Now if I had to increase both of those decimals there to, other way around, sorry, because I got the freeze panes in there, so allow me to do them all. Okay, so let's just increase those. And you can see here, that's rounded to the nearest cent for each value, whereas in this case, it's not. It goes to however many decimals were calculated, remember, because we were increasing it by that inflation figure of 15% annually. And so that's why we get all these extra decimals. And so if you are trying to match data with pastel, it is good practice to round each of your calculated values first, and not just display around the total, because then you will match. And so you can see how we can do that by using the round function. Okay, I need to move on because we definitely want to finish by 12:30. So those of you can, who want to, can watch the second half of the rugby at halftime. So let's move on. But those are critical for spreadsheet integrity. Each and every one of those points from 1 through to 9 are key. We spend a fair bit of time on that, but hopefully some very useful hints on how to check your database integrity and also to maintain it. Okay, so what I'm going to do here now is I'm going to take a copy of these expenses, and I'm going to now project for future years what that is going to, how it's going to affect me if the inflation value annually increases. So I'm going to copy and paste this data onto a new sheet, cell references, so Control-C to copy. But instead of just doing a normal paste, what I'm going to do is I'm going to link to those other cells. And to do that, I'm going to right-click here, Paste Special, and click on this Paste Link. And in doing so, it links the data. You can see here it references those cells on the other sheet. And so if they have to change anyway, they will automatically change. I'm also going to pull through the formatting. And those of you who did the Essentials course with me will hopefully remember this. I can overwrite another paste special on top of what I've just done without replacing it. And so if I want the formatting to come through, the RAND formatting and the fact that those are bolded, click on OK. and it pulls through the formatting. But they're still linked. And so if anything had to change in my data here, then it'll automatically change in the cell references. And that speaks to my Excel golden rule. I don't want to have to start changing things here. So if this insurance managed to knock down to 800, I can go here and literally just go and change that figure there. Everything changes in my spreadsheet. And then likewise here, it also, because it's linked. If I'd copy and pasted just the values, then it wouldn't do that. Across the top here, I'm going to put in some inflation figures. So I'm going to range from 5%. This obviously was pre-formatted as a percentage, so it automatically came with a percent. And over here, I'm going to just increase by 1% each column, so plus 1%. And I'm going to just drag that up a couple. So I'm looking at a range, inflation range of between 5 and 17%. And I'm wanting to check each one of these figures on how it will affect my expenses based on inflationary figure ranging from 5 to 17. So when I build this initially, let me just zoom in a bit so you guys can see it nicely. I'm wanting to take this figure here and I want to increase it by 5%. A lot of people struggle with this principle. It was covered in the previous section because we did that with our groceries, pets, and entertainment. But I need to first multiply by 1 to get the actual value itself, then add the percentage. So if I just do this equal to that multiplied by the percentage, the value above. Now, Excel often does this. It doesn't, if you can't click on the cell above, it's a bit of a bug. Just type in the cell reference. So it's going to be B4. Not B4. I'm in C4. My bad. I don't know why I got 0. Okay, so 5% of 1,000 is 50. But I'm wanting 1,050. I'm wanting to increase it. So to modify this formula, I need to multiply it by 1 plus that figure, which is the same as saying take the figure and then add it to B5 times C4, and it increases it. Okay, so now what I want to do, when I replicate this across, I don't want it to start moving and referencing column C and D, etc. I want it to stay fixed on column B. So I have to put a $ in front of the B to do that. And when I replicate it down, I don't want the reference to move down off row 4. I want it to lock so that it always references the percentages in row 4. You can see obviously this is going a bit pear-shaped as it is. So over here, I need to lock the row reference, and I put a $ in front of that. I can either use the Shift and 4 key to put the $ in, or I can cycle through it using my function key F4. Does the same thing. Okay? And so whenever I do a two-dimensional formula array, which is what this is, there's a basic principle that you're applying here. You lock the column to the left, so you're locking column B, and you lock the row above. There's some mathematical formulas, sum ifs and countifs, which we'll do a bit further down the track. And we use the same principle there to do aggregations and aggregated tables. And so with that now, select it, replicate it all the way across, double click the bottom right hand corner to replicate it down. And by just creating a single formula here, it's created all of these values. So there's 182 formulas generated from a single formula using mixed cell references. I did this training many years ago once, and a guy spent hours creating a table like this, creating each formula individually. So where were you last week to generate this formula array? Another useful tip here, if I do Alt and equals, it should put in a totals at the bottom for all of those, which is great. And I just need to do one for my original values as well. And so this now is my totals, depending on these inflationary figures. And so if inflation jumps by 17% annually, my expenses go from 34,000 to over 40,000, and anywhere in between. And so that there is using mixed cell references. Again, we will cover that a little bit later in session 3, I think it is. We will cover that. Okay. Last little section for today is goal seek, which is a very cool advanced feature. And I'm going to use this little illustration at the beginning here just to highlight or show you what goal seek can actually do. So let's say that I sell a product and I want to sell it for exactly 150 Rand, but I need to take VAT into account. And so if my price ex VAT is 130, you can see VAT here is just increasing it or adding 15% or calculating 15% to that value. And then here, I'm just adding the VAT value and the price ex VAT to get the total. So if I want this to be exactly 150 Rand, I can start experimenting with this and start changing this. So 131, obviously that's too much. I need to go back here and make 130 Rand 50. Okay, I'm getting close, but you can see trial and error could take me a while to get exactly to 150. And so what I can do, I'm just going to undo those steps, is I can use a feature called goal seek, which gets Excel to set the final figure, or you can specify what the final figure is and get Excel to determine what the input value should be. And so I select that cell, I go to my data ribbon at the top, go to what if analysis and select goal seek. And because I've already selected that cell, all I need to do is go and change this value here to what I want it to be. So it's 150 on the dot. And the cell that I want to change is this value here, 130. Click on OK. And in a flash, you can see that I need to price my item at 130 Rand 43 cents, and it gives me exactly 150. I can either click on cancel to ignore that, or click on OK to accept that change, and I've got now my hard-coded value of 130.43. And so that's the principle, is that if any cell which is calculated, you want to set based on an input value which is influencing the calculation. This is not a formula, it has to be a hard-coded value. I can then go and get Excel to do all the dirty work for me. And it can work in big spreadsheets too. And I'm going to go back to my budget and the spreadsheet integrity just to highlight this. So I jump back to spreadsheet integrity here. Let's say I wanted to work out what I need to earn. Let's say I earn a bit of commission, how much I need to bump up my income one by so that I can keep my head above water in May. You can see with the extra insurance that I need to add on for my car insurance, this now jumped below the red line, as it were. And so I need to earn enough so that I keep my head above water. So I can use goal seek for this. I can select that cell that I'm wanting to change, go to my data tab, go to what if analysis, goal seek. I'm wanting to set that. If I'm just keeping my head above water, it will be 0. That wouldn't be ideal in the real world, but for here we want an exact science of 0. And I want to change my income 1. Okay, so the key here, that's a formula which is linking back to that hard-coded value of 30,000. If I click on OK, you can see there it uses trial and error, but much quicker than I can. And I need to earn 278 Rand more a month to be able to keep my head above water, which is not too much. Hopefully I can earn enough commission to do that. So I'm going to click on OK to accept that. Now remember before I said using Excel's second golden rule is important for goal seek. Because if I hadn't had linked these cells to the January value and just hard-coded them at 30,000, it would have just spiked January to like 40,000 and left these at 30. But because these are linked by formulas, it traces all the way back to that value. So the importance when you're doing financial forecasting, that kind of thing, you need to have as many formulas as you possibly can so that you can apply these tools like goal seek. Do one more example. Let's say I've got my sights on an overseas trip and 17,000 is not going to do it for me as a net value. So I want to now just see how much I'd need to earn to come out with 60,000 Rand for the year. So again, select the cell, what if analysis, goal seek, and I want to change that to the value of 60 grand. The cell I want to change is the income one again. Click on OK. And there we go. 60,000 Rand, I need to earn 34,000. Okay, that might be a bit of a stretch. So that if that is, it was just a bit of a pipe dream, I can click on cancel and just return back to what my original figures were. And so that can often take the frustrating guesswork of trying to set an input value for a required output value. And goal seek is a cool way of doing that. It does have its limitations though, because you can only have one output value and a single input value. And there is an alternative, it's called Solver, which we will cover next week. So there's a little incentive to sign up and arrive next week and continue with the course. Because sometimes we have more than one one variable that we can change. And we will use this little exercise here next week just to highlight where the a feature called Solver. You won't necessarily see it here because it's an actual plugin. You have to add to Excel. It's already installed, but it just hasn't been added to your menu ribbon at the top. And so we'll kick off next week as a quick reminder on goal seek. We'll try and solve this particular problem here of trying to maximize my revenue for my little furniture business here. We'll first use goal seek and then see how Solver can tweak that and give us a better solution. Okay, so that's the end of the first session for the advanced course. I just want to, at this point, ask you, Shane, if there are any questions which have been sent through to you. We do, which is proved to be very useful in just cementing the content which we cover, because obviously we cover a lot of material in a short space of time, is that we do set a task each week. It's not compulsory, but it is highly recommended that you do attempt it. And you can see here just the last tab has a task there, and the different questions for that task are listed here on the right hand side. In this particular task, I have included some of the stuff which we've covered so far today. Plus, I've also snuck in a few things from the Essentials course, which are quite important that you understand. So if you get to the stage and you can't finish the task, don't panic, because what we'll do is at the beginning of each successive session, we will recap the task, and we'll use that as a way to kind of recap the previous session and just run through the homework, as it were. Shouldn't take too long, 10-15 minutes, but it is always good to attempt if you have got time, so that it cements the content which has been covered. Okay, so that's the task for session one. What I want to quickly do now is just to run through the different sections which we're going to be covering in the next couple of weeks. And so I've got a bit of a demo spreadsheet here of all the different sections which we'll be covering. I'm not going to dwell on all of them, obviously. I can't cover, 7.5 hours of training in 5 minutes. That wouldn't work. I want to pick out some highlights here. So next week, what we're going to be doing is looking at CSV importing and exporting. I've actually got a CSV file here on my desktop. And we're going to look at the issues when we double click on a CSV. Things like this, where the dates don't pull through correctly because the CSV was created in the States and has made a complete hash of my dates. Plus, here, if I had to put in the totals at the bottom here, so let's just highlight these and do an Alt and equals. That figure is actually, oh, what happened there? Yeah, that figure is not actually correct because it's not including those figures, because the 1000 separator is a comma, not what my 1000 separator is, which is a space. And so we look at ways of automating the importing of CSV files, as well as these key things to look out for, because I guarantee you there are thousands of people every day which are getting caught out with those. So that's importing and exporting CSVs, and we will visit the regional settings on where you can change those key components, like your thousand separator, date format, decimal point, etc., in your regional settings. We do also then next week look at merging and splitting. So here we can merge data using cool little formulas, or we can start using things like flash fill, which is a very quick way to combine data from a row. So here, if I've got the client name in caps, Justin Payne, and I'm going to do Control and E, which is the quick shortcut for flash fill. How cool is that? I can do a client description. I can say Dr. J. Payne, the dentist. Control E, and it automatically does that. Now, if you think that's the solution to all your woes, the problem with this is that if I've misspelled his name, he's not really a Payne, he's P-A-Y-N-E. You can see that it changed the formula, but it doesn't change the others. And so we'll introduce you to a whole lot of text formulas, which will enable you to dynamically do it. So you can see here, this is a dynamic client description using some nested text formulas, using all of these formulas here on the left-hand side. If I scroll across to the left, here we go. All those different text formulas can be very useful for dynamically fixing text and combining text. And so here, if I toggle between PAIN and YN, you can see that that's dynamic, which is great. We can even do things like extract a date of birth and a birthday from an ID number. So I've got a formula here, which is pulling out the date of birth from the ID number and then converting it to a birthday, which is fantastic. So there's some text formulas. We look at some logical formulas as well, which is ifs, if errors, and or. Date formulas, which are very cool. Remember, calculating with dates, we can compute between two dates. We can work out people's ages by dynamically working with a function called today. And we look at the difference between using 365 and a very cool function called yearfrac, which is actually more accurate. And so there's a nice little demo of some date functions. We then look at lookup formulas. You're probably familiar with VLOOKUP, but there are a whole lot of different ways that you can do it. And so these are different ways of applying VLOOKUP using named ranges or columns, etc. Plus we introduce you to index match, which is far more robust than VLOOKUP, because if I do something like this with my VLOOKUP data, quickly demo this to you. So if I had to switch these columns around, my VLOOKUP gives me the wrong value, whereas my index match continues to soldier on. I can even break the VLOOKUP completely, all those VLOOKUP formulas, but my index match works. So index match, if you do a lot of looking up, is a very cool formula to use. We look at introducing tables, which in some respects is even better than named ranges, and the formulas and the syntax used for working with tables. And so it's quite different. And so we introduced the concept of converting your data into tables. We can even do a range lookup. Most people use VLOOKUP with an exact match. This is an example of where you can put things into categories. So here there's like a parking lot, and we need to establish the time spent there, how much money they need to spend. Now you can use nested ifs, which look very complicated. See how complicated that is? We can replace that by using a range lookup. So using our VLOOKUP function where the exact match is false and we have a partial match. So this last one here, the range lookup is actually set to true, and I'll show you how to use index match for that as well. Then we look at some math formulas, counts, ifs, and SUMIFs, which are great for aggregating data. And so over here you can see I'm summarizing all of this data here using countifs and SUMIFs, the other way around, SUMIFs and countifs. And we start to introduce pivot tables and show you how pivot tables can quickly do the same thing, but there are some advantages and disadvantages of both pivot tables and using aggregated formulas like SUMIFs and countifs. Okay, then the following week, the following week, which is the fourth week, we look at data validation. So we've all been there where we have a spreadsheet and people mess it up because they don't enter the correct data. So we can force people to enter data from a specific drop-down list. We can get it so that it prevents them from entering incorrect data. So if they enter a date wrong, so if they do something like the 1st of the 10th, 1978, it'll moan at them and not allow them to enter their data. Over here, client rating has to be between 1 and 100. So if I enter percentage at 110%, it doesn't allow them to enter the information. So we can lock down a spreadsheet so that people only enter data correctly. We then look at cool things of recording a macro. And so if you're wanting to download a bank statement and every time you're needing to make all the changes and edits so that it looks like that at the end with a heading at the top and all the funny formatting taken care of, I'll show you how we can record a macro so we can just do it at a touch of a button as opposed to having to change it each and every time. And then finally, we will look at pivot tables where we can take transactional data like this and put them into some cool looking tables called pivot tables, which have corresponding charts. And we can even put that into a dashboard where we can now put in these cool tools called slices, which enable me now to slice and dice my data at a touch of a button. I can go and modify all of this report by simply clicking on the relevant options. And so I can then update my report. I've got an unlimited number of combinations of reporting that I can do, even using this cool feature called a timeline, which can drill down into months if I need to, and view the data for a particular period. And so we cover all of that in the last section. And so that, in a little whirlwind 5-6 minute tour, is some of the content which we'll cover in days to come or weeks to come. So that might be an appropriate point to run your polls, Shane. We have got a couple of minutes before 1:30 if you want to run those 2 quick polls.